Hello and welcome to MOLA's 2020 Day of the Dead Festival. My name is Solimar Salas, Vice President of the Museum Content and Programming Department. And on behalf of the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach, California, I'd like to thank you for joining us today as we learn more about this special tradition and give you a taste of Dia de los Muertos. Today, we are celebrating our last session and to culminate all the celebrations that we've had. And we will be talking a little bit about the online virtual altar that we've been doing. So before we begin, I'd like to thank the event sponsors that made it possible to make this 2-week event free of charge. Here's a brief welcome from our presenting sponsor, Hyundai.
Welcome to the 2020 Day of the Dead virtual celebration presented by Hyundai. We are thrilled to be a sponsor for this great event. We hope that you enjoy the beautiful traditions that make this annual celebration so special. Have a great day.
Sponsorship and support has also been received by the Kenneth T. and Eileen L. Norris Foundation, the Bess J. Hodges Foundation, Arts Council for Long Beach, Robert Gumbiner Foundation, and the City of Long Beach. Remember that there's still time to participate in the Day of the Dead contest that we're having online. Upload your image with a hashtag for DOD Mola and DOD Hyundai to participate in the prize drawing for the best Day of the Dead inspired costume. Your host for today will be Gabriela Martinez. She's Director of Education, and she's also an artist, educator, and curator. She holds a BA in painting and an MFA in printmaking, and is a 2009 Fellow of the Smithsonian Latino Center's Latino Museum Studies program. Martinez currently serves as the Director of Education at the Museum of Latin American Art, where since 2011, she has led the education department in envisioning and executing the museum's art, education, and culture-based interpretive programming on-site and now online. Her curatorial and interpretive practices center dialogue, inclusivity, and representation, and she works collaboratively with diverse groups to develop exhibitions and programs that tell the stories and address the issues important to their communities. Joining her today is also Nauj Leunam, also known as Juan Silverio, is a multidisciplinary artist and arts professional based in Los Angeles. Their medium approach consists of printmaking, photography, prose, and collage. Nauj mainly works with paper material because of how accessible and cost-effective it is. While seemingly mundane to the masses, paper is an agent that can embody many ideas and stories. Nauj constructs collages with photographic and textual material derived from the personal stories. Now, that meditate on notions of cultural hybridity and language. In 2018, they curated a group exhibition at Self-Help Graphics titled Hacer, Deshacer y Rehacer, featuring works by Roberto Gil de Montes, Los Four, Dalila Paola Mendez, Carlos Ibáñez, and more. They have participated in solo and group exhibitions in Santa Barbara and Los Angeles, including Viva las Fotos, a Day of the Dead memorial for Laura Aguilar at Avenue 50 Studios. Nauj holds a BA degrees in art and Chicano studies from the College of Creative Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Nauj is the Exhibitions and Operations Manager at Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, also known as LIST. Welcome to both of them. My greatest appreciation for both their talent, their time, and for all of you participants here, enjoy the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Solimar. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're really excited that we could all connect here online. It's been a really challenging year for us here at MOLA, but it has provided us, I think, a lot of opportunities in expanding our online programming. So for those of you who have participated with us in the past, you might know that we usually organize an on-site exhibition that is supported by a number of different interpretive programs like after-school workshops and school tours, as well as our annual festival, which last year we were able to host about 5,000 people. And another tradition that we usually organize at MOLA is to put together an ofrenda, either outside or in our lobby. And that becomes sort of like a communal space where people can gather. It's also an educational tool where we can talk about the meaning of Dia de los Muertos and its history. And so for this year, what we needed to do is we needed to pull together a more virtual or online ofrenda. And while the idea of having something digital is nice, I also kind of wanted to still have something that was physical and tactile as well. And I know that we're closed to the public right now. We will be closed indefinitely until it's safe to open up again. Only staff is currently on site and we're rotating in, but I know that having the ofrenda there at the museum and having an artist on site working has been something really special for the staff. And I think it really has even created a sense of community for us and a little bit of normalcy in these very challenging times. So Juan and I are just gonna have a very casual conversation, talk about a little bit about the process of putting this together. And also I'd like for them to talk about their work as well and how it connects to this ofrenda. And then we have a special preview. We have a little video reel of some recording that we did last week of the ofrenda. So you'll get to see some shots of the final installation as well. And all of this will be archived. So all the documentation, all of the images and the video, as well as this talk and an interview with the artist will be archived online. So you'll be able to access that too for at least the next year, if not the foreseeable future. So Juan, we heard a little bit about your practice kind of, or your background as an artist, but could you tell us a little bit about your own personal connection to Dia de los Muertos, maybe how you've practiced it or how it's connected to your own life?
Yeah. So, I mean, as someone who is Latinx, comes from a Mexican-American household, you know, Day of the Dead was always something, is always something that like is in our periphery, in my periphery. And though like in my immediate family, I didn't grow up like building typical or traditional altares in our home space. I did see it. And usually like in these last 2 months of the year, November and December, my parents, they would always take me to join las posadas that a lot of their friends were hosting. And this would always run until like, you know, December. And I would still see those altares, you know, start from the beginning of November, run all the way through the end of December. And yeah, you know, I grew up seeing those, and I grew up seeing all these like very beautiful and, you know, sometimes enormous constructions of ofrendas with all types of colors and all types of objects, and that, you know, are dedicated to honor a lot of the people that were loved and lost.
I always see those as really sort of, I know that for Dia de los Muertos, the ofrenda and these sort of installations that we see are real gathering places. I know at least in my family, like these very domestic spaces became places where children as kids would gather around and kind of ooh and ah at all these little objects. And even while traveling, I know that like traveling around, my mother is one of those people who talks to everyone, and we've stopped at various people's homes where we see like beautiful constructions, and my mom will like engage in them, and we've actually even like sat down and had dinner with perfect strangers.
Wow.
That basically we met by, you know, really just engaging with them and talking to them about like, you know, these things that they're building there. So do you want to maybe, I guess we kind of had this very casual conversation, right, earlier this week about how these kind of mundane sort of domestic traditions that we grew up with have been very influential in our own practice as artists. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we like you said, I mentioned this earlier last week, where growing up, like I'd see these like big constructions, these build altares, but I didn't really understand or really grasp the weight of its significance or its beauty. I mean, I think maybe like it gave me an early understanding to not fear death, by seeing, like, we see a lot of like the calaveras, the little skulls, kind of sparsed out throughout the altar. And normally I think, we see the skull symbol or image like as something to fear, because it's, it's related to death. It's related to like, it's got like the do not touch kind of sign thing. But when I saw them in these altares, like it kind of was just like, it's not something to fear. I think that was something immediately there. But back to kind of circling back to your question, yeah, like I also kind of like grew up having this perception, and I think this was like the Western / American kind of assimilationist perspective that was influencing me to kind of see my own culture, my own people's aesthetic productions to be seen as kind of kitsch, or like, something very lowbrow culture. But it's really not. And I think it, on a very immediate level, it's just a very personal offering for loved ones. And I think that's something, particularly for me, I can speak for myself now, that's something that I really admire, to kind of love very radically, in predominantly I want to say I think that sorry, just words. English can be really hard sometimes. But anyways, what I'm trying to get at is basically, these things that that I grew up and kind of saw as mundane, like I see them now and in recent years being something that is worthy of celebration, something that is worthy of being proclaimed as beauty and much more. Because we have seen altares typically, exist in only the domestic space, in homes, in living rooms, and private spaces. But now we see them very out in the public space. And I think that's like a very incredible thing, and kind of acknowledgement that there's this cultural shift of understanding that these altares are not just something that can only exist in home spaces, that are not something only like domestic, but that they are actual like artworks. They're actual really intricate and beautiful constructions that are a carefully curated craft practice that has, evolved into something so much bigger. And now, especially, we see a lot of like altares, like for example, at the LA Grand Park, we see a lot of them now, and quite a few of them, honor a lot of contemporary and historical political figures, and people who have influenced and shifted culture.
I think that's like the most beautiful aspect of it that I like. It's like this idea of this very universal feeling that we can all identify with, right? Which is honoring our ancestors and, mourning and celebrating together. But then the combination of that with like the individual, very personal touch of the person or the artist who is constructing this. And then also like the cultural and now socio-political influences. I think that makes it really exciting, and this sort of like legitimization, right? I know like we try to say like, oh, I don't need to assimilate, but like it's nice to have sort of that recognition, and it's not as dismissive anymore that this is just like this, whatever, like you said, kitschy sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then I kind of going back to your comment about the calaveras and it being sort of a welcoming for people maybe who aren't familiar with Mexican culture, right? The skull or the calavera is something I think that we all grow up with. I know, at least for me, I didn't grow up practicing Dia de los Muertos, but I certainly grew up playing loteria. And in loteria, you see la calaca and la calavera, And it isn't like a frightening thing. It's just, again, a reminder of like mortality, and almost like, because it is such a fun game, it brings a sense of humor into it as well.
Yeah. I think Mexican, but other Latin American countries like have made things like death a lot more accessible, or like, it's not something morbid. And I think that's something that, kind of help eases us to to grasp that.
Yeah, so when I first approached you about building this ofrenda, I know I left it pretty open. I was really wanting to hear what your personal vision was, and wanting to see how you could really synthesize your art practice to create something, fun and new. And I know that you instantly talked about paper, which I was excited about as well, because I'm a printmaker as well. We have some images of some of your other works. Would you mind maybe talking to us a little bit about some of the pieces, and how they tie into like the concepts, the themes, or the subjects that you like to engage, and then also like the paper and just the lovely accessible practices that you pull into them?
Yeah, so this is a piece that I put together as part of a solo show back when I was in school in Santa Barbara. The show is called Deslenguadexes, or Deslenguados, but with the X as in place of the O at the end. And this piece I titled "What's in a Name." So I think on a sort of conceptual or sort of narrative level, I was thinking a lot about, the sort of social and historical meanings of our names. I was thinking a lot about my name, and I started kind of like free writing all the memories that I have from as early as I can remember about my name, and just like how in 8th grade, like I was one of 5, people who also had the name Juan, and just kind of like reminiscing what that was about, or like what that made me feel. And I thought it was really interesting of like just kind of like what's behind a name. And I think particularly for non-American or non-Anglo folks, names are very important. And it's really interesting when we as non-white people, as Black, Indigenous people of color, we come into larger mainstream spaces that are typically, more anglicized, how our names kind of navigate with the rest, with the dominant culture. And I kind of overlaid that text over a photograph of mine that I just photocopied, and kind of like underwent this like very like long but fun process of photocopying a photocopy. So it became a very like repetitive but meta process, just to kind of play with texture. And ultimately the pieces in the bottom were just like sheddings from the previous photocopy trials.
I really like that idea of shedding. I know, as somebody who also grew up with a very sort of typically like Latinx name, Gabriela, that is later anglicized into like Gabby. I didn't like my name growing up, but I learned to really, really embrace it. And I like how you bring up the idea of like repetition, like this repeated action, which I think is so central to printmaking and the edition, right? And then how we can see that pattern and repetition. I don't know, I'm fascinated by the way that contemporary printmaking artists are really just taking that, like, I don't know, for me, it's a very comforting sort of thing, and then just doing it in so many different ways, using photocopy, using more mechanical reproduction as well.
Yeah.
Should we go to the next image?
Please. Yeah, so this is a piece that I just made like a month ago. I was invited to participate in a group show called El Espejo de la Bruja, curated by Christopher Anthony Velasco and Dakota Newt, who formed this amazing queer horror-inspired art collective called Scream Queens. And I basically kind of, compose this piece that I'm calling Electanto, the enchantment, and it kind of like made a contemporary spin on the mythology of Narcissus, but kind of put like this sort of, Latinx pre-European contact in the Americas spin where this colonial figure that is like kind of obscured, hiding from the tree, like brings a mirror and makes like deflects this image onto the water that sort of consumes. I just kind of wanted to make this commentary on how, the mirror, particularly now, is like this very Western colonial object that hexes the body in front of it, the subject in front of it, to really think awful thoughts about themselves. I was just kind of reflecting also just in my own, like throughout my life, just kind of like how the mirror like has been a very important but also non-important object that just makes us look at ourselves very differently. Yeah.
And now with like selfies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I've noticed that this piece is printed and it's a relief print. Is it a wood cut, a lino cut?
Yeah, it's a lino cut.
The lino cut, and it's on a mate paper. Can you tell us a little bit about what, for people who are not familiar, what a mate paper is and its importance?
Yeah, so a mate paper or a matli is this paper. It's a tradition. It's a handmaking paper tradition that kind of like predates pre-European contact in the Americas. We saw the production of it kind of like in what formerly was Mexico. And it's a paper that's made out of bark tree, or the bark from mulberry tree, I believe. And what really captivated me about learning about this paper's history is that when European contact happened, as part of the process of the I think it's the missionaries who tried to assimilate the natives into Catholicism or Christianity. Part of what they did was, burn down all the paper production centers. And, this paper is still around because it was being practiced privately or secretly. And, thanks to that, we still have some of that production now. And there's like incredible communities of indigenous people all over Mexico who are still practicing this. And they used to create this paper for their own private ceremonies, and create these little paper doll cutouts. And that's still a practice that's being done today with specific indigenous communities.
Yeah, all the destruction, right? I know like codices were burned as well, like all these historical documents that could have told us a little bit more about, indigenous civilizations prior to the invasion of the Americas. And you talked a little bit about, you touched upon sort of the introduction of Catholicism or Christianity, as a form of assimilation and really as a form of cultural control as well.
Yeah.
And again, something really interesting about Dia de los Muertos is that even with sort of, even with the Spaniards bringing in and trying to convert everyone, you still see, particularly with Dia de los Muertos, the fact that it isn't completely a European tradition, right? It's a popular practice that really combines both the traditions and the rituals around ceremonies for the dead, both of Catholic European and then also ancient indigenous traditions.
Yeah.
Let's look at maybe one more. I like the one that is on the blue paper.
Yay.
Is that the $2
Yeah.
piece? Let's look at that one.
Okay. So this one, American on Paper, Queer as a $2 Bill. This was part of my thesis show where I kind of explored a lot of like the history of amate paper production. But I kind of wanted to sort of, I guess, you know, invoke that history into my own production or kind of like, you know, work around it. So I'm also a paper maker, and I made this paper. This blue paper came out of old jeans that my parents used to wear, and that you know, if you've ever done any paper making, it's a very intense and long, but seriously fun process. And I was able to make some paper during my last year of undergrad. And so what I did here was I just kind of collaged like little pieces of Yamate paper. This is kind of more or less like its natural, one of its natural appearances. The other one that you saw, the purple one, was like a dyed version of it. But this one, yeah, I just like kind of like tore little pieces of the amate paper and like sort of embedded it into this blue denim paper. And I added the $2 bill because, you know, money, it's amazing just kind of like the meaning behind currency, like it's paper. So on one hand, like it means absolutely nothing because it's just an object, it's just paper that just, you know, but on the other hand, like it's value. It has a currency. Like it's literally $2. And I think also $2 bills are particularly rare. And I grew up with my mom telling me to always like save those $2 bills, to always like tenerlos guardado. Like you never use them unless you absolutely have to, because they're very rare. And when I had this piece up during my thesis show, a friend of a friend mentioned that, you know, there's this Southern expression that's, you know, queer as a $2 bill, and I had not known of that before. I haven't been to the South in like over a very long time, so you know, there's no way I could have known that. But I really kind of love that that was kind of ingrained. That's something that's, you know, said, and that's something that kind of came up when in conversation. Because I think, yeah, I think it's really interesting that we kind of have these affiliations with rarity, with queerness, and yeah, in a way, it kind of feels like a self-portrait that's just like this amalgam, like this just collection of different things from different places. And yeah, I think the title American on Paper, I think it's, you know, like the title itself says it, you know, it's
No, I get where you're, yeah, like the
you
idea
know,
of defining who is
mhm.
American. Is that where?
Yeah, I think like you know, I think what I'm just kind of like sort of brushing on the idea of like legitimacy
Yeah.
that is only provided by documents, by
Yeah.
actual physical documents, right? Like the whole you know, que si tienes papeles o no tienes papeles, like that's something that's really important, that kind of like either legitimizes a human being, whether they're kind of human or subhuman, right? And that's part of a larger conversation that I was really interested in exploring this work and this thesis show that I titled "Show Me Your Papers." You know, like was just really interested in working with paper material very experimentally, but also exploring its bigger social and political connections.
Yeah, and again, this idea, right, of identity that is tied to this documentation that we maybe tend to think is something that is larger, like to the government, right, this legitimacy to the government or in these public places, but that also ends up really, at least for people like me, who come from very complex immigration backgrounds, right? It becomes also more of a personal conversation within the family, right? Who has papers and who doesn't, and how does that affect pretty much daily life, any type of, you know, important events that happen. I really love how you have combined like the amata paper, which to me speaks, you know, of your cultural background. And I think it's lovely that you put in the blue jeans that I think you mentioned tied to your parents as well, which I tie into like my dad's working class background too, you know, that whole notion as well. So I really love this piece. This is really beautiful.
Thank you.
So we talked a little bit about like Dia de los Muertos symbols where we mentioned the calavera, but now I kind of want to seg into the installation that you did, right? And I want to start by looking at the foundation that you laid out for the ofrenda, which is of a paper landscape that you built up. So Arturo, if you could pull up the image. I have my colleague Arturo Baez, who is amazing, and he's running all the tech in the background. So you'll hear me kind of chatting with him. It's in the slideshow. Yeah, in this, yeah, okay. There we go, perfect, thank you. So could you tell us a little bit about why you decided this background, this forms the backdrop to the entire ofrenda, and this is completely like out of your imagination. So can you tell us like why you decided on this and what different symbols we can see in here that tie into Dia de los Muertos from your perspective?
Yeah. So, you know, when we were having this conversation early on about doing the project, one of the first things that I like thought of was, you know, creating this like installation with paper. I just wanted to have like a, you know, the materials main focus be with paper. And immediately I kind of thought about like a desert landscape. I like thought about kind of like its quietness. It like invokes a sense of like just stillness that is not threatening. It's not like chaotic. It's just very like quiet and like has like a very like silent grace almost. And that's kind of like as I was drawing it just like on a regular side like 9x12 sketch pad, I was like thinking a lot about like how I see this as a sort of like depiction of the spirit world. And I wanted to invoke some elements from, you know, Dia de los Muertos, and something that we see a lot in ofrendas are the flowers, you know, the flor de cempasúchil, which I have there toward the top, the two circular figures that are there. I kind of wanted to place them there and kind of, you know, take the place of sun and moon that are typical indicators of time, right? And I kind of think of the spirit world, the spirit realm as like a very timeless place. So I thought it was very fitting to just have like these big flowers right there. And yeah, what I did with the drawing was I just kind of like blew it up and you know, printed out in different, you know, 8.5 by 11 sheet. No, it was 11 by 17 sheets. And just kind of tiled them together. I've done this before where I've, you know, kind of like work on a smaller scale, on a very like intimate, personal, like hand drawing scale, and just kind of like, you know, go to the computer and blow it up. Kind of like really enjoy working in a very analog and digital way like that, with old school kind of printing technology.
And then I want to point out, you know, that you can see, I like this image because it really shows the process. So on the left-hand side of the image, you can really see like the intense measuring and leveling that it took to put all of these together. Can you tell us how you adhered it onto the wall?
Yeah, so I used like a wallpaper glue adhesive that I just got from Home Depot. Like it just, yeah, I just painted it behind the paper and laid it down on the wall and squeegeed it down so that it like stays on the surface and doesn't, you know, crinkle as much, because that's one of the things with paper, especially like simple copy paper. Like if you have any wet material that gets on the surface, it tends to kind of crinkle a little bit. So it's important to really kind of like flatten it out as much as you can with like a squeegee or something with like a sharp angle.
Arturo, can we go to the image of now working in the art studio? So we're going to transition into talking about the other really central element to it. Okay, so there's a picture of you. You're in our art studio. We'll be so happy to have it inhabited with a warm body again.
Yeah.
And can you tell us what you're working on, what you're doing?
Yeah, so I was like creating tons of cutting papel picado for this installation. So what I ended up doing was, you know, I printed the portraits, the submissions that we received, and I like integrated a lot of like papel picado process into those photographs. So and then later when I finished doing those, like I just ended up cutting just regular colored copy paper and making these papel picados because I just really enjoyed the process. It was like very meditative, and it's like it's a very like, you know, simple and kind of intuitive thing that you just like it becomes a mindless activity and like you just sort of get into the zone.
And again, like one of those traditions that I think we all kind of grew up with, like making these sort of paper crafts at home. Yeah, I remember like even, you know, like snowflakes and banners and everything. What I really appreciated, and I think you mentioned this at the beginning, is the fact that you really use these materials that anybody can access. So when I saw your materials list and where I saw the sources of it, it was all places. There weren't any specialty supplies that were necessary to put on this ofrenda. So Arturo, do you think we can go into the video of the installation of the papel picado? And there were some, as you can see in there, there are some of the flags or the papel picado that is plain. And then also there are some that have images that were printed on there. So let's just take a look. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit, you can. If not, we can just enjoy the process of watching you install. And I love your mask. That's amazing. Go LA.
Go LA. Yeah, it was fun, and I think you know what's papel picado if it's not like these like very like simple patterns. I mean, now like it's become a lot very intricate, and like, you know, you see all these like specialized designs on them, and yeah, like I just kind of wanted to take it back to like a very like nostalgic time, like in my life at least, where it was just, you know, you could just take a pair of scissors and like grab a few sheets of paper and like fold them and just cut them. Yeah, it was I you know, back to the point of accessibility, like I thought it was like really important to just, you know, put together this piece with accessible materials from accessible places, because ofrendas, you know, they're usually made out of very accessible things, you know, at least the very backbone of it, and until you start getting to the nitty gritty of like very specialized, very specific objects that, you know, are offerings for loved ones. But ultimately, like, you know, just there are very essential things that go into the creation of an altar that have to be accessible, and that's kind of what I really wanted to also highlight, that anyone can create this type of work anywhere.
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, I didn't grow up, you know, building ofrendas in my home, but as soon as I learned more about this tradition, I just found that I could just gather all of the important items, right, for whoever I was honoring at that time. and pull it together and then just make this ofrenda. And
Yeah.
then going back to the papel picado, it also being an important symbol that is in both private and public spaces as well. I think if you go into any, Zócalo in Mexico during the time when they're, celebrating something, you will see the papel picado. And you mentioned this when we were talking earlier, which was once paper and now it's moving into plastic production, right? So here's an image of some of the papel picado that you made using submissions from the public. So can you tell us a little bit about the process, maybe for people who didn't participate, how we gathered these images and the process of working with them?
Yeah, so, we wanted to find a way to collaborate with the community to build this like altar that, as I understand it, typically in previous years, an altar was created at Mola, with the collaboration of several people, of artists, of artisans, artaristas, and just people from the community. And, because of like the circumstances that we are in this year, that wasn't possible. So we wanted to find a way to sort of work together with the people from the community, at least in a digital way, and but still have that very physical, tactile component in the ofrenda making process. So what we decided to do was to do a call for submissions of photographs of people's loved ones who passed away, recently or long time ago. It didn't matter, and just anyone who wanted to share, anyone who wanted to have their loved one be honored in this ofrenda. And it was a kind of mix of like submissions that we received through Mola from people who emailed and wrote messages. And it was also, a couple of like my own friends who I reached out to who, were very enthusiastic and grateful to kind of like, have their family members be seen. And I think that's a really, like, it became a very important responsibility, like toward the middle of like, receiving these photographs, because then they were all going to be part of this like artwork that's in a museum space.
And it was also nice. I know that our own volunteers and docents also participated in it as well.
Yeah.
So I think it was special for us to have honoring different volunteers and staff members who have passed that we consider family here at the museum.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go ahead and look at some separate submissions, and let me know if you want to pause at any time and talk about that particular person. I was overwhelmed with all the lovely messages. I was copied onto those emails, so I got to see a lot of the submissions, and they varied from beloved pets, to ancestors. Lovely. There's one of our docents who passed away a few years ago, Don Clem.
Could you pause it there, Arturo? Yeah, so this was Mercy Mack. Her, along with a few other people who I didn't mention, I decided to kind of like also, invite, add into the ofrenda. Mercy Mack was a Black trans woman who passed away. Let me see here, my notes. Passed away this year. I included her along with a couple of other folks, particularly from Black and trans communities, just as a sort of like acknowledgement of like how in particular for this communities, like their transitions into the spirit world is often a very violent one. And I kind of wanted to sort of invite them to be present in this very, in thinking about this landscape as a very like still and peaceful place. I kind of wanted to sort of like add their images and their presence, be a part of this community of people who, we are also honoring.
And it really does provide a true reflection of our community. You know what I mean? The trans community is so often excluded in representation. So I really appreciate you really reflecting all the people that make up, the Long Beach and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So Arturo, I think we can keep going. So cute.
Can we pause it here? Yeah, that was a photograph of Juana Magaña, a submission from my friend Melba Martinez, who I see is here. She shared two images of two family members who passed away recently, like quite literally days away from each other. And yeah, I mean, I felt very, very happy for them, just because, during this whole period with the health crisis going on, to lose loved ones during this time, I think it's even harder. And so when she reached out to, share these submissions, I felt very moved, and felt like, the responsibility to do an even better job with this installation was cranked up to tenfold. But it was also just a very, loving way to kind of memorialize her. And it was, yeah, thanks for sharing your relatives, Melba.
And I know in a meeting that we had earlier when we were talking about the process of doing this, and you and I had conversations as you were putting this together, and you did keep mentioning this idea of like all of this energy and the intimacy that you felt in working with this. Can you tell us about how the process affected you as an artist and as a person?
Yeah, it was on one hand, like it just felt very like kind of numbing almost, because cutting papel picado is just, to me at least, is a very meditative experience that just, you lose track of time. And then as I saw the photos, like it was, I think I felt like just the weight of everyone's energy, like toward the end. It just made me think a lot about like the ephemerality of life, but also the ephemerality of these materials and these processes, because, papel picado, we were talking earlier that like now they're making these papel picado templates made out of plastic so that they last longer, so that they, don't get destroyed, because, the traditional papel picados, they get destroyed very easily. They're very ephemeral. And so I, just thinking about that and integrating them with the photographs just made a lot of sense to me. And really kind of thinking a lot about just the ephemerality of life, and thinking about what these photographs mean to the people who submitted them, you know, and definitely reading through the messages that people sent in along with the photographs. I think that was also very moving to me because they were always kind of written with this sort of, you know, in this way, in the form of like a request that I haven't seen before. Like, you know, a lot of, I think a lot of artworks, like I've never collaborated with people, with like a large group of people in this way. So for me, it was definitely a first, but it was also just a very amazing experience because we did this together, and I could not have done it with made this incredible installation, this ofrenda, this altar, without the help of everyone who submitted a photograph. So thank you all for doing that and for helping us out.
Yeah, I also noticed that the tone was of like a request as well. When it was like, you know, we really wanted this to happen, and the people were so generous with, you know, their words and with their emotions and feelings as well. So I think, let's see, I have one more question, I guess, for you, and then we can take a question or two from the audience. Somebody has already submitted something. But I guess we already talked about how this affected you, but I'd like to know what you want the takeaway for participants or viewers to be. And then Arturo, if we can go ahead and look at the video where it shows the entire ofrenda, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the takeaways definitely is that an installation like this can be done anywhere with almost any kind of materials. That was a really important thing for me to create this installation with very accessible materials. And you know, there's so much going on. I wanted to make it very colorful. Papel picado, we see these strings of papel picado in very beautiful, vibrant colors. I also kind of wanted to like invoke that and bring that with like the photographs. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, other than I'm just like super grateful to have had this opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this project. It was very, I mean, I don't want to say fun, even though it was fun, but it was a very big honor to do this project during this time, you know, which doing this project any other time would have been also just a major scale of honor. But, you know, particularly in 2020, it's the feelings are tenfold, I think.
Yeah, there's a certain intensity to this time right now, I think, and I'm also like you. Any connection that I can make with artists and with members of the community is just so important. So we had one question. I'd like to encourage anyone who has a question for now in the chat, but we did have one question from a viewer named Erika, and Erika says that they are recently have been introduced to Dia de los Muertos. They are of Latinx heritage, but they didn't grow up with it as well. And this is a question that I get all the time also in my line of work, is that if there is a right or wrong way of observing Dia de los Muertos. I think there can be a wrong way to do it, and we can talk about that. But now I want to know what your opinion is of if there is a right or wrong way of doing this.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you in that like there isn't like a very right way to do it, and I think there is like maybe a wrong way. Like I don't know how to describe it, but you know it's wrong when you see it. But yeah, like it can come in multitude of ways. For me, like I've never done, like I've never personally made an altar at home, just because you know it wasn't something that I grew up. And now even more during this time, like you know, I definitely want to be careful with that, because there is a lot of, you know, it's a very major tradition, but with this piece, with this installation, like I knew that, you know, we couldn't make a traditional altar because, you know, there wasn't an opportunity for a gathering to happen at Mola. So, you know, I kind of thought of a different way to do it. And that's kind of like where we came up with the idea for the call submissions and take a different route. Yeah, so there's definitely a couple, like several different ways that, you know, ofrendas can be done. I think in artwork and, you know, with art, it's, you know, there's definitely a lot of like paths that you can take to creating one. I think there's a lot of, it has to do with a lot of intention and what your intention is and where you're coming from. But yeah, like it's always a learning process. You know, even if like you're a very like seasoned person or very experienced person, um, I think it definitely helps to be in conversation with other people, especially with elders, and people who have experience with making ofrendas, whether that's like in the home, in the domestic space, or if, you know, they're creating very like public outdoor installations. Like, yeah, there's definitely no right way to do it.
Yeah, and I like to remind people that, you know, because this was a popular tradition that came of this synthesis of totally almost disparate sort of, you know, rituals, but all with, you know, honoring the dead. The beauty of Dia de los Muertos is that it's so dynamic and it's always changing. And I think that ties into like the beauty of Latinx culture as well, right? As we migrate from one place to another, we adapt all of our traditions and rituals. And as a museum of modern and contemporary art, we're always interested in ways that, you know, contemporary artists reinterpret all of these very important cultural traditions and just kind of infuse them with new life and reimagine them, just like this ofrenda that you built. I would say, you know, the key to celebrating or honoring the dead during Dia de los Muertos is respect. I think that that's kind of the foundation of everything. Respect for the individuals, and then also respect for the cultural traditions as well, which doesn't mean you can't reinterpret them, but just kind of like keep that in mind. I don't know if we have any other questions. I'm not seeing any more come up, but now, is there anything that you want to maybe end on before I wrap it up?
No, again, I mean, just want to reiterate my appreciation, my gratitude to you, Gabriela, and to your team, you know, who's been behind the Dia de los Muertos Festival programming for the last 2 weeks. It was a very intense, but spiritually uplifting experience for me to travel from Koreatown all the way to Long Beach to do this work. And you know, big thank you to everyone who collaborated with us by submitting a photograph. It was a pleasure. It was an honor. And just, you know, after on the night of you know, leaving Mola, after the installation was completed, I just felt like this very like intense wave of energy and like flowing through my body. It just felt like all of these people who are now ancestors to many of us, like were with us, were with me, and just kind of like feeling that, you know, strength and vulnerability at the same time. Yeah, it was amazing.
Thank you. No, it was such a pleasure to work with you. I've been wanting to work with you for such a long time, and I'm really glad that this opportunity came up, and I look forward to working with you again in the future. And to all of our participants that joined us today, we're so glad that you took time out of your Sunday afternoon to be here and to learn more about this virtual ofrenda. I want to remind you that today was kind of the unveiling, but we will be posting more documentation, including a video conversation that we recorded with now earlier this week as well, and some more detailed images and more information about the entries that were submitted. And we invite you to continue exploring our Dia de los Muertos programming. It can be found archived on our YouTube channel. You can also find it online at mola.org. And we are closed essentially into the near future. So we hope that you'll continue joining us in our virtual programming. We miss you so much. We miss having all of our visitors and members and volunteers and docents. And we're really looking forward to the day that we can greet you and invite you back on site again. But we appreciate your support in the meantime. So everybody have a lovely afternoon, and we'll see you later.
Bye.